got hooked because of it. And in fact, I should tell you that my good friend Justin Bren, his wife found out about Kratom because of you. Because of your show, he had a problem with his shoulder, that shoulder surgery. They put him on Oxycontins. He was fucked up on them and was having a really hard time getting off it, having shakes really bad, and Kratom was the only thing that got him off of it.
Right, and that's not surprising. I mean, this has been known for a very long time in Thailand, and that was actually the reason that it was originally prohibited. I don't know if you're aware of that, because the government taxed opium, and people started using kratom, then they made kratom illegal.
Is that the right way to say it? People say Kratom.
Yeah.
You're the only one I've heard say kratom.
It's a Thai word, people in Thailand call it kratom.
Oh, okay.
So people in the US call it kratom. It's also, they have, I think it's a krypton. So they're not thinking of that part.
Right.
But kratom is closer.
So you did.
Yeah. But I feel that was, yeah.
Like American people would say Ecuador, Argentina.
But it is kratom.
Yeah, kratom. Okay, so we'll try to call it kratom.
Or something close to that. It's closer to that than kratom.
Right, and so the reason why it was made illegal was because of the fact that it was pinching some of the profits off of the opium trade.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fucked up.
And so this has been known for a long time that it helps people get off more addictive opioids. And
How does it do that?
well, it's an opioid itself, and a lot of people don't want to admit or acknowledge that, but I think we need to get beyond this idea that drugs are inherently bad or opioids are inherently bad just because the ones that we're aware of have a lot of problems. In some sense, medicinal chemistry and pharmacology and all this are still in a very primitive state, and there's so much to be learned. So we're mostly giving people these derivatives of morphine that have been around for 100 years, and there are better things. We're going to continuously discover less addictive treatments for pain, and I think that the alkaloids in kratom are a step in that direction, and which is so tragic that they're trying to now make it illegal, because this is something that, as far as I can tell, has genuinely helped an enormous number of people reduce their intake of more addictive and more dangerous opioids.
One of the things that I felt, and again, my dose was not extremely high, but when I was on it, I was very coherent. It was clear to me that I was affected by something, but it felt kind of good. It didn't feel bad. It felt a little uneasy, like whoa, this world feels a little weird right now, but it did not feel like I was impaired. Like, I know a lot of people who take it and exercise. Like, I have a friend who'll take 10 pills and exercise. It just seems kind of fucking crazy.
Yes.
But he says he has a great workout.
Right.
By taking that stuff before he works out.
Yeah, it seems to lend itself to a lot of different applications. And in Thailand, it's used almost exclusively for that sort of purpose in the South. It's a drug that laborers use so that they can, collect the latex from rubber trees and just get their job done. That's what it's about. That's what opioids are about for a lot of the world, both in the United States and in Africa and in Thailand. People live hard lives, and manual labor is painful and repetitive and difficult, and anything that makes that a little bit more manageable is a very important tool for dealing with.
I always felt like people that did heroin or opiates or something like that were on a very short road to death. That was my perception when I was a kid. And then I had a friend who was a longshoreman. They worked on the docks, they would bring fish in and fillet the fish for the market. And he worked with a guy that every day at lunch, the guy would go cop, he would get his heroin, he would shoot it up in his car, and then he'd go back to work. And I was like, he'd go back to work. I was like, yep, he worked every day. Like, every day he showed up and every day he worked. Like, yeah, he was never late. Nope. Just did his work. I was like, wow. Well, I didn't think you could do that. I thought you did heroin, the next thing you know, you'd just be on the floor, in a fetal position, your own urine, and you just would fall apart and die.
Right. Yeah, there's this idea that people sometimes refer to as pharmacological determinism, that a certain drug has to do a certain thing. So alcohol has to sedate and disinhibit you. Heroin has to addict you and make you a slave to it and kill you. Cocaine has to be a euphoric thing that's done at parties. It's also very addictive. PCP has to make you strip nude and run around fighting cops and punching holes in wooden fences. But when you look at this, anthropologists have looked at certain drugs that are used cross-culturally, like alcohol, and find is this whole idea of pharmacological determinism is fundamentally flawed. Drugs behave differently in different cultures depending on the set and setting of the user. And so you find all sorts of instances that are major exceptions to these rules that we've set up for these various drugs. For example, PCP, which is arguably one of the most ubiquitously maligned drugs in the world. And you can imagine that PCP is medicinal, but even to this day, PCP is in Schedule 2, not Schedule 1 like cannabis and LSD. Schedule 2 can still be prescribed actually, and that's because it had a history of medicinal use. There was even PCP psychotherapy in the UK in the 50s. So this is something that most people wouldn't believe, but to those patients that were taking it then, there was none of this cultural association with PCP being a drug that causes psychosis or makes you strip nude. It was simply another tool for a psychiatrist to use and help people release repressed memories or traumas that they were afraid to talk about when sober.
Well, we're seeing that now with MDMA, right? And also ketamine. Ketamine being used as an actual tool for psychotherapy, particularly for people with depression, is having really good results. My friend Neil Brennan, who's a hilarious comedian, said struggles with depression. Yeah, he got great relief from taking ketamine.
Right. And what I think is really interesting is, this is often packaged as a sort of psychedelic renaissance, but I think in a larger context, it's a drug-facilitated psychotherapy renaissance, because this was not just limited to psychedelics. People did something called narcoanalysis, where they would give people sedatives like propofol, the drug that killed Michael Jackson, or various barbiturates or various other drugs, and the relaxing effect would allow people to talk more openly to a therapist, and it was considered very effective. Now this idea of a psychiatrist injecting you with a drug in order to help you talk about your problems is unheard of. I don't think anyone does it anymore, but it used to be very common, and I think a return to that is going to be really beneficial.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the right drugs with the right cases and the right people, and I think we've got to get past these schedules. That when you have things like marijuana and psilocybin and especially DMT, which your own body produces, is a Schedule 1 drug, and the famous Terrence McKenna line we're all holding, when it comes to DMT, it's just stupid. It's stupid that these things are Schedule 1. When you're saying there's no medical benefit whatsoever or medical application for cannabis, it's fucking crazy. You want to have something that really actively promotes a distrust in law enforcement. The scheduling of drugs is one of the best ones, because when you look at something like marijuana and you see that that's a Schedule 1 drug, that's infuriating to people that gain huge benefits from cannabis. I mean, people that have going through chemotherapy, people that have intraocular pressure from glaucoma. I mean, you can go down the list over and over and over again. Kids that have epilepsy. There's so many people that have had great benefit, particularly from edible cannabis, for people that have seizures. I mean, you can keep going on and on and on. It's an amazing plant. And to have that demonized because of some ridiculous propaganda from the 1930s that still somehow or another clung on in 2018. We think about all the information we have now with the internet, and the fact that cannabis is still Schedule 1. We have assholes like Jeff Sessions still saying things like good people don't smoke marijuana. Like, this is crazy talk.
It's crazy, but keep in mind it was just about 100 years ago that alcohol was prohibited in the United States, and it took 13 years to reverse that. And that was alcohol. There's no drug more integrated into our culture than alcohol, and that took 13 years to reverse.
What was that like back then? That must have been madness when alcohol was illegal, when the cops would come in and jackbooted thugs would knock over gin mills and bust open kegs of whiskey and spill it all out. Like, what the fuck was that like?
It was disastrous, but I think what's interesting about that is it was a worthwhile experiment. To give them the benefit of the doubt, it was worthwhile to see, because on some sense, you could say that prohibition has a certain logic to it. You could say drugs cause problems, so if we just make all the drugs illegal, then maybe those problems will disappear. But it didn't work. The experiment failed, and There's nothing wrong with a failed experiment, but it's a problem if you keep repeating it over and over and over again for 100 years looking for a different result.
Right, and then go to other drugs and go, well, this one, let's try this one, let's make this one legal.
And it's a terrible PR situation for the police as well. If I were a police officer, I'd be the biggest opponent of the war on drugs and of anyone. When you think about it, why does the average person in New York City know for something that wasn't really a crime to begin with, for some kind of victimless crime? A firefighter is just there to help you, to save you if you're in trouble. And the same would be true of police officers if it weren't for the drug war. Ideally, there's a little more complexity to it.
Sure, there's certainly more complexity when it comes to shootings and
Yes,
things along those lines.
exactly.
But, I mean, most of it was drugs. Most of it was catching people with marijuana,
Yeah.
which is just fucking insane. You just decide, hey, you look like you might be streetwise. Get over here.
And that's the way these laws have functioned from the very beginning. I mean, if you look at drug law in the UK, it tends to be very black and white. Something is legal or illegal. If it's legal, it can be sold. If it's illegal, it can't be sold anywhere. It's a far-reaching gray area. And it's created an ability for the government to selectively prosecute people whenever they want, if they want.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be lessening. I mean, when you have someone like Jeff Sessions in office, it's very disturbing. But then Trump says things like he's very strong on states' rights to, pass marijuana laws and things along those lines. You're very credulous.
I don't know. I mean, I suppose I am a bit incredulous when it comes to Trump doing anything good. But
I think if you told him that people love him more, he did things good, he would do things good.
that's probably.
Gotta get somebody who's good at back rubs.
Good.
But
I don't know. The podcast.
I think that will help. I mean,
Yes, and one thing that I am certain will help, and it's really tragic that this is the case, but it's capitalism, it's the corporatization of these drugs.
Yeah.
Because with cannabis, with the hippies and the counterculture having, marches down the streets of New York holding up 420 signs, it doesn't, I suppose, have that much clout in the eyes of lawmakers. But when you have some guy from Yale Business School who's never smoked weed, who says, this is a serious business opportunity.
Yeah.
And we're going to make it big and definitely invest millions and millions of dollars into it, hires lobbyists, plays the game like a capitalist. And it's tragic for the people who did fight and did go to prison and did sacrifice that then these business school guys come along and reap all the benefits, but that's the way it works.
Yeah, that is the way it works, and that's okay. I mean, it's just a weird path. It's a weird path, but as long as we can get to legalization, I'm 100% for that path. I just think that might be the only way. In this weird country, this country is so enamored with money. I mean, we're so enamored with money and profits, and even for dying people, even old people. Like Warren Buffett invested shit tons of money in warehouses to sell, to grow cannabis in Colorado when the laws were passed. I mean, that guy's 150,000 years old. He's worth billions of dollars, and he's like, who gives a shit? I'm making more money now, and more and more and more. I mean, even when they're really old, they're massively motivated by profit.
Yeah, and I think the same will be true for psychedelics. It will probably be true for all of these things, because we need to have lobbyists.
Yeah.
We need to have this sort of typical white-collar support to push things forward.
I agree. I don't see any other way around it right now. I mean, the real hope is that cannabis, not that it will get rid of capitalism, but that we'll figure out it's hard to get rid of those things across the line, right? these psychedelic drugs in particular provide an escape from the momentum of this life that you created or that you found yourself a part of. It's very difficult for people to stop behavior patterns, to stop and just look at themselves objectively and sort of rethink, regroup, and reassess. And this is one of the best things about cannabis and about psilocybin and a lot of these other psychedelic drugs is that it gives you this newfound perspective that allows you to reconsider things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with, ketamine, the treatment of depression, it's a similar idea because depressed people become used to these very ingrained patterns of thinking, and anything that can break you out of that, that can shake it up for a minute and maybe give you a different perspective, I think is inherently therapeutic.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think I'm hoping that what I see is that we're changing our perception of everyone casually smokes marijuana now in our circles. There's so many people that do. There's a few that don't, sober people and whatever. But it's way more common, whereas 10, 15 years ago, this was something you did. If you had a good job, if you had a family, it's not something you wanted people to know about.
And what I think is really interesting is that in and of itself changes the nature of the cannabis experience. So I think if somebody uses cannabis in a culture that supports it, that approves of it, their experience will be better by virtue of that fact.
Right.
So there's a certain shame that a lot of people feel when using any drug. I, for whatever crazy reason, feel a little bit with cannabis. Studying, it should be, more optimistic, it's a little comfort oriented. I should be working harder. But that's, I think, just the vestiges of this propaganda that I've been fed or something like that. Or maybe it's true, but I understand from culture, drugs, the benefits of cannabis so hard, that it cures all diseases, it's good for you, it cures cancer, all that stuff. Because if you have that in your mind, at the very least, it's going to reduce that sort of internal shame that you might feel. It makes the entire experience healthier and more beneficial. So if you decide cannabis comfort oriented and won't take you away from your responsibilities, then that's what it will become. But if you decide it's competitive, think and right, then it will become that as well.
Yeah, it's a weird one, right? Because people that take it that are prone to paranoia or that are dealing with in their life right warm feeling of comfort and of like sort of
personal experience, I never really used psychedelics in high school with the exception of salvia, because I was terrified of a bad trip. I talked to friends who described bad trips and they say, oh, it's a bad trip. It's really bad, it's scary. And I would think, oh, that's terrible. I would never want a bad trip. I'm never going to touch these things because a bad trip would be too much for me to tolerate. And then I started using psychedelics and I realized there's no such thing as a bad trip anymore. There's a bad meal or a bad relationship or a bad day. I mean, having an occasional bad thing in life is not just doing things like eating or having a relationship or living typically. So
what do you mean by this? Are you saying there's
communicate about psychedelics is that it's the difficult ones that are often the best. Those are the ones that really teach you something, and when you're trying to talk about psychedelics, use them, it's not a great selling point to say, oh, the best thing that can happen is you're going to think you're going to die. But that is arguably the best thing that can happen.
Well, what is one thing? This is the same, you can get a near-death experience in cannabis, you just don't ever die. But you really do. I mean, it's the death of so many perceptions and so many things. There's an absolute genuine connection between people.
I don't think you can argue that psychedelics cause mental illness, but you can, in some measures, you can have to reduce it. Substance use disorders. Yeah.
I've never seen someone have a complete psychotic break.
It was that. He never recovered.
Never.
He never recovered. My best friend at the time, and he never recovered.
So he was fine before the psychedelic?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
So I'm aware that this is very important to talk about that though. And with further research, perhaps we could isolate genes, you know, like they have for CTE, now they have, they can do an analysis of your genes and then determine whether or not something like football will be dangerous perhaps to you because you have a higher probability of developing CTE.
would be wonderful if we could have a little bit of that with psilocybin, or with cannabis, or with anything else. To recognize suicide breakdown.
Yes, I mean, this is one of so many things that needs to be done, and that's, happening right now. I'm excited about it as well, but on one level, it is very politically oriented research. Typically been done before, but established these things that have been known for a long time. Psilocybin occasions mystical type experience, or MDMA is useful for treating PTSD, or psilocybin has an anti-addictive effect. These are things that people have known for a little while, but now it's about proving it. But I'm really looking forward to getting deeper into serious questions about interact with
Different diets. When people are, when you're eating certain types of foods that are bad for your body, I'd really be curious to see what kind of effect that has. When you have real large-scale research that goes over really important variables in terms of like human health, and then you add in these different substances, whether it's psilocybin or cannabis or whatever it is, it's going to be interesting to see how the body reacts to these various perturbances and various changes.
Yeah, and that's traditionally in indigenous groups, the diet role in the way that the drug is administered, and I think we're slowly.
I'm sure.
But I had the opportunity to look at the way salvia is used in the mountains of Oaxaca, and Native American peyote use, and all these different things. And yeah, there's so much to be learned from all these traditions that are not reflected in the current clinical climate, because they can't be. But I think that's going to be a part of it, is slowly integrating these other alchemists in the plants to see what role they play, in the same way that the initial medicalization of cannabis was marinol, which is THC and sesame oil, but now there's increased understanding of the way these accessory cannabinoids modulate the THC experience, or whether THC is even the primary therapeutic agent for certain disorders. And I imagine the same thing will be true for peyote and for the iboga alkaloids, and probably even for some of the chemicals found in mushrooms.
So when you're doing the show, have you had any problems? Have you had any pushback against what you're doing, or any issues with it being on Vice?
I've had an enormous amount of freedom. Ultimately, I have very, very little to complain about when it comes to censorship. There was the way the show got started. The show was sort of an interesting story. It looks like a dragonfly. The molecule looks like a dragonfly, kind of.
And it's got a very high.
It's super, super potent and very, very long lasting. So it lends itself. that. So it's just a weird pattern that we've done repeatedly over time. And I don't know if you're looking at who's on the
Yes,
podcast.
I'm in it right now.
Yeah, it's great. And then we're not learning from the mistakes of the past, yet it's just something that's fun to consider. Prohibition that most people wouldn't want to use in the first place, and when they do use them, they don't know what they're taking. Enormous, unmeasured doses without having any idea what they were getting into. Therapy potential. Homeless people and zombies in Brooklyn in 2017 turns out to activate a certain subtype of the PD1 receptors that's useful for Parkinson's disease or something like that. Then we're going to regret having done that. So I think people have to be very careful. Anytime you say anything negative about a drug, you have to be very, very careful because the implications can be enormous. I think that the best stance in all of this is
also with just what journalism is. It's like asking a comedian or the common approach is to say something that scares people. And that's what clickbait is mostly about. Either outrage or fear. He said that George Soros he tests marijuana every year to see how much George Soros is influencing the level of THC. To the author of it and said, well, this was manipulated by the editor. The editor manipulated the title, the change.
But a great excuse.
Yeah. That's true. Like, Rolling Stone did an article about me and they called me a psychedelic warrior. And I said to the guy who wrote it, what the fuck is that? I was laughing, and he goes, dude, I did not write that.
Yeah.
And an editor gets a hold of it, tries to make it more salacious, it becomes something that's more, it's more likely for people to fire.
About this conversation we're having. Yankee never said anything about that. Listen carefully to what he's saying. What more people are going to pay attention to. Far less people than the initial. This is one of the real more insidious things about printing things that are patently untrue purposely. That people do things that are untrue with the caveat that they could just print a retraction that maybe 30% of the people that read the original article are going to read. That the initial imprint is what's going to stick with people. Even if someone calls you a racist, and then it turns out the person who called you a racist is lying. The people who heard you were racist first. Distribution of information in the history of human beings. The potential for impacting large groups of people is so huge now. Yes. And this is the result of that is also that the viewers have a lot of power. And I think that in some sense they don't quite recognize the nature of that power. It's like voting with your dollar. If you spend all of your time commenting hatefully on things you don't like, you are actively encouraging the production of more of that thing that you don't like.
Right.
If you like something, you need to engage with what you approve of more, because every time you engage with something you dislike, advertisements are sold, and you're incentivized to do that thing. That's a really sticky thing when you have a culture. Because it becomes sort of addiction. Yeah, it's drug-like in and of itself. I mean, I see it, these arguments, people are frittering away their finite time on earth, engaged in these endless comment battles that no one reads. And it's a very dark reality, but it is also something that's driving the culture of journalism that
well with your description of the things that people are allowed to do that are legal, that are very dangerous, like race car driving, bungee jumping, all these things that we just allow them to do. We don't think twice about it. Using a parachute, all that crazy shit. We just openly, nobody's saying, hey, we should ban skydiving. There's no one saying that. Fucking a lot of people die skydiving, man. It's a fucking dangerous pursuit. We don't seem to care. We seem to care about. Has to be from real life experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is just, again, this idea of pharmacological determinism. Like I had a friend that was very, very, very seriously addicted to cocaine and had the resources to do immense quantities every single day. And you'd always say, well, you know, if I try heroin, I know it's all over for me. It's going to help me. So few side effects. You know, it has horrible constipation, it has all kinds of weird sweating problems. I don't think they're especially type of drugs, but they're romanticized so much in our culture that people think that's it, heroin, the ultimate high. Well, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not even that great at all. Maybe it's garbage, and it doesn't even matter. That's the same way I feel about snorted cocaine. It's a drug. It's not an issue of stay away from it because it's so freaking good.
It's your body reacting to the addictive properties of alcohol. That you're getting addicted to alcohol almost immediately. That your body is compensating for that, and then this hangover is not just you being dehydrated; it's also your body withdrawing from alcohol. Insane quantities of the drug. So all of this acetaldehyde accumulates in your body and it has a directly toxic effect. Is there a way to counteract that and mitigate the effect?
Yes, there are proposed ways to do it. I haven't experimented with any of them myself because I don't really like alcohol that much to begin with.
Isn't glutathione, that's something that allows your body to process it more easily?
all time. Well, the drug itself is called desomorphine, and it's been used medicinally. There's nothing especially addictive or dangerous at all about desomorphine. The problem is that people are injecting completely impure reactions that had all of the Yeah, maybe people on Instagram, people post themselves and say, 6 months sober guys, thank you so much, and tons of congratulations, because it's a virtue, because you accomplished something, you're not using drugs.
Yeah.
Whereas in other cultures,
I think people like you are very important, and I'm a big fan. But I think one of the reasons why you're important is you are a condescending of real drugs. Like you understand what they actually do. You could explain them to the layman, or you could debate them with someone who was a doctor, perhaps, that wanted to talk about the dangers of it. You understand all the various aspects of it. I think there's a tremendous amount of ignorance when it comes to drugs. Truly considered a virtue, and it's immensely invasive. I say this as someone who's analyzed my own urine in a laboratory before, and it's like a strange portal into your own life. You're showing to a stranger everything that you consumed is then apparent there. Yeah. And it's a huge invasion of privacy that we've just decided is acceptable. You have to be very careful about these things. Yeah. No, I agree. And of course, the synthetic cannabinoid epidemic, if you want to call it that, I actually don't want to call it that because the long since gone.
Oh yeah, or even the result of passive exposure. There was a great scientific article that came out a couple of years ago where they found that this passive exposure to cannabis smoke contaminates their hair with THC, so that all the people who had hair attacks who actually had not smoked cannabis, but you just something in a room, someone else was doing it, just being in contact with someone who smoked cannabis could then deposit THC in their hair and cause you to test positive. So these tests aren't even necessarily reliable. This is the same problem. There was a kind of trend a little while ago, I don't know if you saw about this, where people get their urine tested for different, to quantify the levels of neurotransmitter, metabolites in the urine, which is supposed to be a blueprint of your movement.
It's such a piss poor way of maintaining order, checking people's consciousness, and making what you do is judge people based on their productivity. If I have some guy and he shows up working 6 hours, I go work, great. You get very productive for a short period of time doing speed, but I think the downside of that, there's so many people that are on Adderall today, right? What are your feelings on that?
I think that it's a very interesting issue because it's amazing when you look at the history of all these things, how these issues repeat themselves over and over and over again. So there's a problem in the 50s, there's a problem in the 60s, there's a problem in the 70s, there's a problem now. There's always a problem that we're treating as if we're using, but people have been using amphetamine type stimulants for the better part of 100 years. And the reality is that these stimulants have ambiguous potential for all sorts of things. Some people use low doses of methamphetamine. In fact, methamphetamine is Schedule 2 because to this day it can be and is prescribed as a treatment for ADHD in addition to amphetamine through Adderall.
What do they call it when they describe it?
Desoxyn is the brand name for methamphetamine, and Adderall is the brand name for amphetamine. And I've tried both drugs, both amphetamine and methamphetamine, and they're very, very similar drugs. Judgment can be compromised regardless.
Is that why?
No, probably not.
But it could be why he gets so much shit done. I mean, remember when during you just don't want to compliment him, but I understand that.
No, that's not why. It's again, it's this idea, there's a certain exculpatory value that drugs have. People make the same arguments about Hitler. Like Hitler, he was just high on speed, that explains it. The Nazis, they were just high on speed, that explains it. But what value does it really have? Same thing with Anthony Bourdain. We'll say, oh, no drugs were found in the system post-mortem. So what? What if they had then what?
Well, the idea that he might have been experiencing a fucked up state of mind because of some drug that made him make a poor choice and take his own life.
We wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know why he did it. Is that what you're saying?
It wouldn't explain anything, really.
Strongly linked to suicidal thoughts. In fact, there are listed as some side effects for a lot of these drugs, right? Don't you think that, I mean, I know correlation doesn't matter for causation, but don't you think that that's worth considering? That's something to be discussed?
It's worth considering, but I would be careful about assigning too much value to it, which is what people tend to do. Same thing with Columbine. They'll say, oh, he's on antidepressants. That's why. Is it why? Does it really explain it? Because there's a hell of a lot of people that take the same drugs and don't show all of their classmates.
Right. For sure. Well, this is what the journalist was talking about, that he had been on this stuff for a long time, and that there was actually Dwayne Reed Pharmacy in New York where he described where he got the prescription filled.
People are doing the same thing with finasteride as well, though, and I found that particularly obnoxious.
Finasteride is
Propecia. So they're saying, oh, he's on finasteride, and that explains the affair. Yeah, I've seen, but it's not very common. It does occur, but it's not common.
Right, but for the person that does get those side effects, saying that it's not common doesn't really offer any comfort.
No.
Like, oh, well, I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the lucky ones when you jump off the bridge. Get my hair grow back.
But, the reason that I'm so opinionated about this particular issue is because you see it time and time again. It
Right.
never stops. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jeffrey McDonald murder case.
No, I'm not.
Super fascinating. You probably read about it, forgot about it. It was a big thing in maybe 1970. But he was this military doctor,